figure out why that happens.
So you're still co-host.
Let me try stopping the share and starting it again.
Maybe it's weird, but it was just working.
And you have to stop the share in order to see the breakout room icon. When your screen share, it disappears all of a sudden.
Yeah, I noticed that when I was trying to like show you how to use the breakout room, the whole Zoom screen just went.
Let's try this again. Now it's working again.
Yay!
All right, it's 9 o'clock. As our sales trainer, who a lot of you probably don't know, because if you're new, you may not be aware of her, Diana Kokoska, she used to say, it's 9 o'clock and we have an appointment. May I come in? So we're going to go. It's 9 o'clock. We've got an appointment here to move forward with Ignite, negotiate the deal. I hope everybody had a good weekend and a good start to the week. I see some familiar names and faces here from last week when I was able to facilitate and spend some time with you. And I also see some new faces. In case you don't know me, my name is Jeff Roney. I'm with the Syracuse Market Center. And I've been in the real estate business for over 30 years. I've been with KW for 15 years as an agent, as a rainmaker running a team, and also as a team leader for 4 years. So I'm happy to be here with you today. And I'm glad that you could join us. And I want to congratulate you for taking time out of your day and your schedule to spend some time together learning. Negotiations are a lot of fun and they change along with the marketplace. And we'll be talking today about some of those aspects and how it relates to the market that we're in today versus some other markets that you'll see throughout your real estate career. Because the only thing that's constant is change. I don't know who said that originally, but it's really true. And the longer we live and the more experiences we have, the more we know that it's true. So welcome to Negotiate the Deal. What we're going to do today is we're going to break down and apply some tactics to tackle what I would say are some common points in negotiation. We're going to look at some counter offers also and try to work towards a win-win. Participation is going to be really, really important in this session today. There's a lot of group exercises in groups of 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, and we'll be breaking it up, depending on how many people we've got on here. The other thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at a negotiation strategy, which is called the 3 Ps. And the 3 Ps stands for prepare, present, and position. And we're going to employ those strategies through a practical application. Please make sure that you have your participant guide with you, because we're going to be referring to that and we're going to be using that throughout the time that we spend together today. So right now, we're focusing on one aspect of running a business, and that's negotiating the contracts, which is step number 3 on the right-hand side of the slide that you're looking at. Negotiations are a really integral part of most real estate transactions, and the negotiation can be a pivotal point in the transaction. So it's really important to try to find common ground and strive for those win-win agreements. The way that negotiations happen can be a deal maker, or they can be also a deal breaker where things just fall apart. So we're going to look at breaking down those common points. We're going to look at examining the 3 Ps. We're going to look at counter tactics. We're going to do what we call real play, which is employing the 3 Ps in some group exercises. And we'll also give you a chance to recap any successes that you're having, any challenges that you're having, and kind of report out on how your daily habits are going. And I'm available to, answer any questions. We can bounce some things off each other and learn together. We will likely take a break at some point here during this class. I'm sure you're all going to need to, run to the facilities or maybe check your email or make a phone call, return a text message, whatever you need to do. We will carve out a little bit of time to do that so we can just stay on top of everything that needs to get taken care of. So this slide is pretty interesting because at the top you see buyer, and then you see buyer's agent, you see seller's agent, and you see seller. It's just a simple way of illustrating what the relationship is in a typical real estate transaction. Obviously there could be 2 buyers or 3 buyers or 2 sellers or 3 sellers, but usually it's the agents that are in between the buyer and the seller, and they have an important interaction with each other as well as with their respective clients. So it really goes back and forth. It's a bargaining process between 2 or more parties that are seeking to discover a common ground, or maybe to settle a matter of mutual concern, or resolve a conflict. The negotiation that happens between a buyer or a seller and their agent is also happening between the agents, like I mentioned a couple minutes ago. They take place really in 2 different areas of the transaction. Number 1 is the offer phase, and that's where the goal of the negotiation is to get a signed contract. And then in your guide, it may say that the second stage is what they call the option period. This happens while we've got a signed contract and the goal is to get the contract closed. In our area, I don't think the term option period is used very often, but it's really the same thing as when you're doing home inspections and radon tests and mold testing and things like that. That's the contingency period, and what we're working for is to get those contingencies satisfied during that period. And oftentimes there's a lot of negotiation, or maybe a little, that goes back and forth during that period. Any questions so far? Okay, so what we're going to do right now is we're going to break out into small groups, and we're going to have a conversation in those small groups regarding your responses to questions that are on the screen. The first one is, how can your ability to negotiate affect the outcome of the deal? What are some ways that you negotiate in your everyday life? What are skills that great negotiators possess? And why is asking questions important when negotiating? We're just going to take about 5 minutes to do this. And when the time is up, if 1 or 2 of the groups could share one thing that your group talked about, that would be great. I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to stop the screen share and allow some smaller groups, and then you'll be called back into the room in about 5 minutes. Is everybody clear on what you're doing?
How do we go into groups on Zoom?
Well, we're going to do that for you. I think you're automatically going to go in if it works well. If it doesn't, we'll try again. But I'm going to take care of that right now, okay? And hopefully it'll work fine.
Hi, it's Kristen. I'm not going to be able to be in a group. I'm just going to be listening today.
Kristen, I couldn't hear what you said. Are you there?
I just said I wasn't going to be able to join a group right now. I'm just listening.
Okay. It's going to be about a 5-minute one. Welcome back, everyone. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys discussed with those 4 questions. How can your ability to negotiate affect the outcome of the deal? Any thoughts on that from one of the groups?
Could affect
David.
the price. You're either going to pay more or less, and your
Okay.
clients are going to be happy or unhappy.
Could save a deal from going down.
Yeah, absolutely. No question about it. There's some agents out there that really don't negotiate at all. They just send an offer and that's the end of it. You know, it either flies or it doesn't. And sometimes you don't really have the opportunity to negotiate, but you know, many times you definitely do. What are some ways that some of you might negotiate in your everyday life?
Jennifer negotiates with her dog.
Tell me about that.
He looks at me and he has to go out and I don't have time to take him out. I
Yeah.
just give him a look. He understands.
Does anybody negotiate with their child or significant other or
Yes.
spouse?
Yeah,
Yes,
Nicole's
child.
doing that now.
They're doing it right now. He stole
Yeah.
my pen.
Every day.
Right? It's just a part of daily life. I mean, if you think about it, there's so many things that are a negotiation. I mean, something as simple as when you're going to leave to go somewhere, to what you're going to have for dinner, to who's going to take responsibility for doing something, you know, around the house, in the workplace. Obviously, there's all kinds of negotiations that take place. I remember when we used to have our market center was completely sold out as far as office space, and there was a waiting list, and there was so much jockeying for position to who's going to get that office when that person leaves, and you know, so on and so forth. And there were a lot of negotiations around that. You know, now with COVID, if you want an office, we've got one for you. Don't worry, plenty of space available. Why do you think that it's important to ask questions during negotiating?
To get,
Oh, go ahead.
to get a feel on the terms and conditions.
Okay, so you want to, when you say get a feel for terms and conditions, sorry about that. Explain further what you mean.
Okay, so like, putting your feeler out there to see what their reaction might be to kind of get your way. So for instance, say like they would say your buyer wants all the appliances in the house. And so
Okay.
you put that out there and they come back, well, we'll give you the stove, the refrigerator, but they want the washer and dryer.
So it's kind of like, it's a counter offer, right?
Yeah, kind of like a counter offer.
Okay, so when you're asking questions, as part of a negotiation, how's it gonna help you?
Well, I just went through this on Sunday. I've lost a couple deals with sending in the purchase offer and asking for a home inspection, and they apparently didn't like that idea. So I called the listing agent for the house we wanted to put a purchase offer on, and I said,
Okay.
are they going to be scared off by a home inspection? And they're like, no, that's fine. I'm like, okay, good. We can put that in there and be sure that our offer is going to be considered, you know.
So this was a different house after your people lost?
After ones we lost, yeah, this is
Right,
a different
gotcha.
house. We're still waiting on this one to come back.
No, that was really wise of you to call and see how, you know, that request would be received. It's interesting, you know, some home sellers are like, well, of course they can have an inspection because who would buy a house without an inspection? You know, other ones are more just focused on getting the cleanest offer that they can with the least amount of contingencies. And, you know, they're really not looking to have their house inspected for, you know, whatever reason, just because it's so competitive right now and they know that they might not have to deal with it. You know, I've got a lot of strong feelings about inspections, and that's not what this class is about. I just wish that more sellers would get their houses inspected before they go on the market. because it can help them overcome any potential objections. They could fully disclose the condition of their property. And I think that it would put more money in a lot of cases in their pocket because they'd be avoiding, renegotiations. And these buyers might take that inspection report and be satisfied with it and then not have a contingency for their own, if it's done by somebody reputable. But it really hasn't caught fire here like it has in some other parts of the country. Some parts of the country, houses are always pre-listing inspected. So it's all, local knowledge, local custom, what the agents are used to telling people that they need to do or should want to do. But yeah, the inspection is obviously a big deal right now. So let's move on. Page 4 in your participant guide is another activity. We're not going to do breakout rooms for this. We're going to stay together and have some fun coming up with some ideas. And what we're going to do is brainstorm negotiation issues. So once an offer is made, there's 3 possible outcomes: accept, reject, or counteroffer. That's usually what's going to happen. One of those 3 things. So what we're going to do is talk about issues and brainstorm what issues might come up during the buying or selling process. And we'll take a few minutes to do this. And if you want to take some notes on your page 4, you'll have a list of negotiation issues that we come up with as a group. So let's start right away. I'll go first. I'll say that we can negotiate over price. So I'll pick the obvious one and get that out of the way. What are some of the other things that you all think we could be negotiating over in a real estate transaction?
Either the time that they have to get out.
Okay, excellent. So the timing or the closing date, let's say, right? Because that's when possession is typically delivered. Sometimes it's not, but usually it is. So yeah, that's a good one. We've got closing date and we've got price.
Appliances. What's going on?
Appliances? Yeah, absolutely.
Who pays for the inspections?
Could you repeat that, please?
Who pays for the inspections? Like the re-inspection and whatever?
Okay, yeah, okay.
Something like a beautiful chandelier that's in a house, whether or not it stays or goes.
Yeah, personal property and fixtures. I think in our real estate course, they call that chattel, right? Like who goes around using that word? But they teach it to us. That's what it is. How about deposit amount? Like earnest money, good faith, deposit amount. I see that getting negotiated quite a bit, especially in this market, because it's symbolic of the intent and the strength of the buyer's offer. If they're willing to write a check for $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 as an earnest money deposit, as opposed to $1,000 or $2,000 or $3,000, I think that really sends a message. So I'm seeing counter offers also, and maybe you are too, where maybe the buyer makes an offer with a $5,000 deposit and the seller says, hey, I like everything about this offer, but I want a $10,000 earnest money deposit. So that's their counter offer. What else? There's more. I'm sure we can come up with some more.
Cash versus financed.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good one. And also within that, if there is financing, there could be negotiations over the type of financing. You might have somebody that makes an offer with an FHA mortgage, and you could come back with, can they go conventional? The seller would feel a lot more comfortable with that. And sometimes they can, and sometimes they can't. But yeah, cash versus financing is definitely a negotiating point. How about repairs? I was in a property a couple days ago where they had an area of the basement where there was a water problem, and they were very upfront about it on their disclosure, and they had gone out and they had gotten an estimate from a basement waterproofing company, and they provided a copy of the estimate so that any buyer coming in could see that it was going to take a few $1,000s to take care of the problem, and they were offering a credit to the buyer. Instead of taking care of it themselves, they wanted the buyer to pick up the ball and run with it after the closing. I don't know if they, didn't have the cash to pay for it or just felt like dealing with it this way. I'm really not sure. But a lot of times there's repairs. The seller might know they need a roof, and that could be something that you negotiate over. It could be really anything that falls under that category of repairs. How about
Closing
commission?
date.
Could commissions be negotiable?
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. They're negotiable by law to begin with. And there are negotiations that take place with commissions. One that's interesting is, and we can talk about commissions because we're all with the same company. We're not colluding with other companies. So we can talk about commissions together. But let's say that your policy in your business, running your business, is that if you're working with a buyer client and they've signed a buyer agency contract, that you've agreed to X percentage as commission, okay? And let's say that you're showing your folks a listing where less than X is being offered as compensation to a buyer broker. Can you, in the purchase offer, ask for more commission than what they're offering?
You can, but you might not get it.
Yeah, you can. It's legal to do that in New York State. It's also perfectly fine for you to explain to the buyer that your contract is for X, they're offering less than X, and that the buyer is going to be expected to pay the difference. That happens a lot. So commissions are definitely negotiable. You could have an offer go in and have a listing agent come back to you and say, well, the seller is willing to accept your offer, but they want you to take less on your commission. Is that something you're willing to do? So the conversation, does and will come up from time to time. And you got to be strong and realize what your value is and evaluate all the aspects of the transaction and make sure that if you're considering taking less, that it's okay with your team leader or your broker or whoever you have to go to get authorization to take less of a commission if you're not allowed to do that on your own.
Does that work
Anybody
on
have
the
any
upside
more?
also, Jeff?
Sorry, one more time.
Does that also work on the upside?
How do you mean?
Or so I want 8%. Do I have to get permission to go that way?
I would ask your team leader in your market center. I would say no. I don't think you do.
On the upside, you wouldn't have to, but on the downside, you would.
Yeah, I mean, you're a partner with your brokerage, and usually there's a commission policy, and I don't know what the commission policy is in your market center. Which office are you with?
Rochester.
Okay.
Brighton.
Yeah, so I don't know what the commission policy is there. In our market center, it says, this is our commission. Okay, if you're in the field and you have a need to do something, take less, you can go to this number. Anything less than that percentage, you have to get authorization from the team leader. That's the policy.
Okay.
And I look at it like this. If I'm in business with my broker as an agent, we're really partners. So anything I do affects both of us. So we should have a conversation, rather than making a unilateral, decision. And, we're all here to support each other. And I think usually you're going to get support from your brokerage. But when I was team leader in Syracuse, I had a brand new agent that had gone through training, and he went out to do his first transaction, and it was, I couldn't believe it still to this day, but he came back to the office and he said, I just sold a house. And he said, in order to make the deal, I had to tell them that we'd do it for nothing. So he said absolutely no commission, period. I'm not getting a commission on this transaction. And he didn't ask anybody. He just cut that deal. So, unfortunately for him, it was time for a little tough love and he had to pay the commission because he had no right to do that. And, it was hard to coach him and counsel him in that way, but he never did it again. And he became, a very good agent. And he kind of realized that he just got nervous and gave the store away, and it was several $1,000s. It wasn't like a few hundred. So it was an unfortunate situation. But anyway, I think we've got most of the high points here as far as negotiation issues. There are, of course, other things that maybe we haven't thought of. If anybody wants to add to the list, feel free to go right ahead and speak up.
I was going to say concessions.
Oh yeah, that's a really good one. Seller concessions. Thankfully, we have seller concessions. There's so many extra transactions out there that come together when the seller can help the buyer with closing costs. It's a little harder to do now because things are selling for above the list price in so many cases. And then you'd have to add closing costs on top of it and really push the price higher and higher. And some sellers aren't willing to do that because they're worried about the appraisal, or they've got 2 or 3 other offers or more that aren't asking for seller concessions. However, they're commonly used, especially with VA and FHA mortgaging, and sometimes with conventional as well. So that's a good one. Thank you for bringing that up.
Post-closing occupancy?
Yeah, that's another good one. So post-possession or pre-possession, right? Or the buyer wants to move in early. Well, so many things can come up. Sometimes you've got buyers making an offer where, they want to rent and then close in 9 months because they have to clear up something on their credit report. There's all kinds of scenarios out there that come up from time to time and are either feasible or more feasible or less feasible, depending on market conditions and how much interest there is in the property. But those are really good, excellent ones to add on. So on your page 5, it's called Common Points of Negotiation. And my ability to advance my slides keeps freezing. I don't know why. So just bear with me for a second. I've got to stop the share and restart it and see if we have any better luck. But on page 5, while I'm doing that in your guide, it goes through some specific points of negotiation in a little bit more detail. Take a look at those, and then we will discuss anything that you want to from that page. We're not going to break into groups. This is just going to take me a second to stop and restart so I can keep the slides going. Okay, looks like we're back in business. So the most common points of negotiation are usually these 2 things that you're seeing in front of you: price and terms. While the sales price is, usually the primary factor in negotiations, it's not always the bottom line. Sometimes the terms are just as important as the price. Sometimes they're more important. And in this market, it's very common because we have a lot of situations where a seller is receiving multiple offers at the same price. And it's the terms of those offers, in addition to how strong the buyer is financially, that usually determines which one is going to win. So the terms of an offer can be financial, they can be time-based, they can be both. When the buyer and seller can't agree on a sales price, the following 5 offer terms come into play. And these are the things that are outlined on that page 5 that I mentioned before restarting the screen share. Closing costs, closing date, conveyances, earnest money, an option fee, and repairs. The option fee, if you use it in your marketplace, let me know. I think it's a Texas thing. And because KW is headquartered in Texas, I think that's primarily the reason why it's in here. It gives the buyer an option to purchase during the option period, and there's a fee involved with that option period. It's kind of like a due diligence period would be in commercial real estate. And if the buyer opts out, the seller may be able to keep that option fee for having the property tied up and not being able to sell it to anybody else for a certain time period while the buyer goes through that process. You know, here, at least in the Syracuse market, it's usually an earnest money deposit. And once the contract is signed, it's supposed to be put into the escrow account at the earliest possible moment, earliest possible time frame. And then you've got X number of days to do your home inspection, if that's been agreed to do your radon test, mold testing, whatever else is in the contract as a contingency. Any questions on any of these negotiating points or any additional things that you want to discuss? If not, we're going to keep on moving. So on your page 6 in your guide, there's some tips for negotiating. And what I'd like you to do is to read those tips. And after you read the tips, look back at page 5 during the guide. We're going to go into breakout rooms for this. And you're going to be in small groups with like 1 or 2 partners in a room. And use what you've learned so far to brainstorm a list of how you might respond to a particular negotiating point. So pick one out and try to come up with 3 types of responses within your group. If you finish up and you're sitting there twiddling your thumbs, pick out another one and just do a second one if you like. Is everybody clear on what you're going to do when we do go to breakout? You're all good? Okay, so keep those tips in mind. Number 1 is always be professional. Keep your goal in mind of getting a signed contract. That's what you're working towards. And it's what both agents and their clients have in mind. Control what you say to anyone involved in the transaction. If you're going to create anxiety for your client or for other parties, you're reducing their leverage in negotiations. There's also confidentiality to consider and fiduciary duty as well. Always go back to motivation. Remind your client why they want to buy, why they want to sell, and help them reevaluate their request if they're becoming unreasonable. Listen more than you talk. Keep your client's motivation close to your chest, and don't be attached to the outcome. You can't always get everything that you or your clients want. Don't let it affect your mindset and your ability to remain positive. Even if the deal doesn't go through, or if your client doesn't act on the advice that you're giving them, you can usually move on and find a different way to get your client what they want and end up with a win-win situation. So don't forget to refer back to page 5. And those are the common points of negotiation. Pick one, discuss it, and we will see you again in a few minutes.
Don't I look like an angel?
Very angelic. Absolutely.
Where'd we go? We're back. Where'd I go?
Back, and I'm still trying to solve this locking of the screen thing. It's really weird. I don't know why it's doing it. Okay, we're good for now. So how did you all do? Who wants to go first? I'd love to hear, which negotiating point you picked and how the conversation went.
I think we focused on professionalism and motivation with regard to price, and how, you talk to your client about reducing the price in order to generate a lot of competition, which will ultimately raise the price. You get a lot of offers, but it was a motivation, less time on the market, higher price. So that's generally where our conversation went.
Okay, it's difficult, I think, for home sellers to grasp that idea, because they feel like once I go down, I can't come back up. Once I'm at a higher price, I can always come down, but we know that that's not always the best scenario for them. So I think that's a great example. Anybody else want to share?
I'll go.
Okay, Jennifer, thank you.
So we touched a little bit on like closing date, and maybe kind of just around the idea of you, both the buyer and the seller, if it becomes an issue, maybe one person wants to get in the house beforehand or vice versa, kind of trying to like problems that would come up. We discussed, well, where would they stay? Where would, they do with their stuff? You have to worry about storage fees and all that. And we were just kind of discussing give a little to get a little. So like maybe, somebody can suggest something that's going to make the other person not feel like they are like having to get out of their house and now pay for this and pay for that. So maybe you can kind of come together in a negotiation type thing and, work out prices that will work in both hands.
I love it. You're working towards a win-win, which takes some give and take sometimes, right? It can't be all or nothing. When either party is all or nothing, many times it'll break down, because then it becomes emotional and people just dig in their heels, and they can't see the forest for the trees, or whatever that old saying is, and they just lose sight of the mission, right? The big mission is, you want to buy, they want to sell. How can we make this happen for everyone so that everyone wins? So I like that. I think that's great. Anybody else have anything they want to share?
Our group was big on the power of silence.
Oh, okay. I like this.
Listening, let them do the talking, which also I think helps the outcome. It helps maintain confidentiality and do share responsibility. So the power of listening and the power of letting somebody else do the talking.
Right. Some smart person once said, "He who speaks first loses," and sometimes that's very, very true. In a negotiation. Now it's very interesting now, of course, in this strong sellers market, because sellers they're driving the train. So there's just not as much back and forth as I think there is in a more balanced market. Yet there's still, negotiations obviously that take place over a number of things. So that's good. The power of silence and listening more than you speak. So now we're going to take a look at what we mentioned in the beginning, this process of the 3 Ps approach to negotiation, and how that's going to help us set up to discuss the following topic of counter tactics. On your page 7, I believe, for some reason in my materials, there's sometimes one page off from your participant guide. I don't know why that is, just some kind of an error, but anyway, keep page 7 of your participant guide handy. Negotiation is a skill, as it says on the slide, that can be learned and perfected with experience. The very best practice for negotiating and bringing parties together is to use this approach that we call the 3 Ps. Step 1, the first P, is prepare. Preparation is key to building confidence and ensuring a smooth negotiation process. Number 2 is present, and that's moving into the negotiation process by presenting your offer. Simple enough. 3 is positioning, and that's moving both parties closer until you have a full agreement. A lot like Jennifer's group was trying to do with those smaller issues, is bringing people together to get to that full agreement stage. So preparation is the first P. And as you can see on the slide, it's important to review these preparation steps. Number 1 is to know your goal. So knowing your goal is about having a clear goal of reaching that win-win agreement in which both the buyer and the seller are satisfied with the outcome of the negotiation. Remind your client that you're working with, whether they're a buyer or a seller, of their motivation for moving or buying the house. And that when the contract closes, they're going to be able to move on with their lives and get to that goal that they told you was so important in the beginning. Know your client. Make sure that you fully understand your client's goals. And that comes through asking questions, like some of you have mentioned. Learn the areas in which they're willing to negotiate and where they're going to stand firm. You know, maybe there's some things for them that are just absolute must-haves, and they're not going to budge on those issues no matter what. Thinking ahead, anticipating what the other party wants out of the negotiation, and writing down and knowing and understanding how you think that they might counter the offer and how you plan to handle it. So it's just about thinking about the possible response to the offer that's being made, and then what are we going to do if they say this or if they say that, and how would we handle it? Setting clear expectations prior to speaking with or meeting with the other party. Setting clear and realistic expectations with your client. Then do your best to underpromise and overdeliver. Stress the importance of moving quickly to create a sense of urgency. And part of setting clear expectations with your client is being clear that win-lose agreements are likely to be rejected by the other side. To set yourself up for success, make it a win-win. And be informed. This one I think is really important. Not that they all aren't, but this one really jumps out at me. Before making an offer or a counteroffer, it's a good idea to speak with the other agent. Ask open-ended questions, use that active listening to find out as much as you can about the other party and their agent. That helps you to know with whom you're negotiating and what points you're going to negotiate and where you and your client might have some leverage. In these multiple offer scenarios, it's interesting, you could have a listing and all of a sudden there's, 23 showings in 3 days, which is not uncommon or even more. And then all of a sudden you might be receiving 5 offers, okay? What some agents will do is they'll just send the offer. It'll come in by email and you'll see that there's an offer on your listing. Other agents that are a little bit more savvy are going to pick up the phone and they're going to call you and try to get some information that's going to help them to craft the best designed offer with price and terms that may in fact work. You obviously can't disclose everything about what your client wants in terms of price and everything else. They know what the list price is, but a lot of times there's something really important to your client that it's perfectly fine for you to talk about with the other party, and they're going to make sure that their offer includes what's important to your client because they want to have the best chance of getting their offer accepted. So calling the other agent, seeing what you can find out is a good idea. And when you're getting calls like that from other agents, they're taking an extra step that some agents might not to try to optimize the chance of getting their offer accepted. Obeying the laws. This is obviously kind of obvious, but a lot of states and localities have their own set of laws that regulate zoning, mortgage qualification, other real estate matters. Just know what the current regulations are and you put yourself in a position of reducing risk and making sure that you don't get in trouble with the Department of State or anybody else. Knowing your documents inside and out. We talked about this a little bit last week. The fact that it's really important to be familiar with the forms that are provided to you in your multiple listing service or by your board of realtors, and take the time needed to understand the form templates and what belongs in each field. Some agents just write offers like haphazardly and send them out. And then when you get an offer like that and there's blanks that haven't been filled in, or it's been sloppily done and poorly prepared, it just doesn't reflect well on that agent or their level of professionalism. And they're certainly not doing a great job for their client either. Practice good, clean real estate in a professional way. Pay attention to your forms and docs. Like last week, we talked briefly about buyer agency contracts and other parts of a purchase offer, or maybe documents that you would get signed by your buyer client. And the fact that you don't need to be able to recite each one line by line by line, but you need to be able to paraphrase what these different documents and forms are so that you can easily explain them to the person that you're working with. So just get to know your forms. And it's not something that should prevent you from going out and selling real estate. You want to get going. Start talking to people, start taking listings, start working with buyers if you're not already, but take some time out and time block to get familiar with the forms so that you're comfortable with them and that you can act quickly when you need to. With the way the market has been, you could be showing a house at 5 and writing an offer at 6:15. So you want to know that you're comfortable and familiar with the forms. Any questions on any of that? Okay, let's move on. And we keep coming back to this point about asking questions and how it's key in gaining information to end up on the winning side of a negotiation. There's open-ended questions and close-ended questions. The open-ended ones are the ones that are really not designed to elicit a yes or no answer. They could have unlimited response options. Examples of that here are these questions that you see on the slide. You know, what additional information should I know? I can't answer that question if it's asked of me yes or no. I have to say something, you know, that's more than that. What's important about closing in 30 days? How do you feel about that? Those are just simple examples. A close-ended question is, do you have to sell your home by a specific date? No. Yes. Do you have any other offers? Yes or no. What's the bottom line price that you would consider? I'm not telling you. So these are things that generally are going to give you short answers, okay? And sometimes it's appropriate to ask a close-ended question. It's not like it's a good versus bad with these two things, but there's a time and a place and a situation for each type of question. So asking the right questions is important in this process that we're talking about with negotiations. It's going to allow you to establish and uncover objectives, things of importance and goals of your client, and possibly the listing agent or the buyer's agent, depending on what side you're on. Through asking the questions, you gain more information. More information you have, as they say, knowledge is power. It strengthens your ability to negotiate, and it increases your chances of having that win-win negotiation. So it's going to help in all those areas that we've been discussing, everything from getting to know your client to setting clear expectations. At a basic level, the open and close-ended questions are just exactly what we discussed. So could one of you or two of you tell me why do you think it's beneficial to use open-ended questions over a close-ended question in a certain situation? How's it going to help you?
Well, some agents are chatty Cathys, so you get them going and then they'll tell you more information.
Isn't that the truth? That is so true. It reminds me of before COVID, you know, it's common in our area, at least in certain parts of Central New York, to use brokers' open houses so that you can go out and you can preview the inventory. So on Wednesdays, between 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock, the eastern suburbs of Syracuse, it's Brokers Open House Day. You know, no one's doing it now, but the listing agent hosts the Brokers Open House, and agents go out on tour and they go in and they take a look, right? I don't know if any of you have done this, but you go in there and sometimes it's more like a social event than it is looking at the house. There might be lunch being served and the listing agent's kind of holding court, and all their friends in the real estate business are there having lunch. And you know what's happening during that time? The listing agent is going blah, 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 and giving out all kinds of information that they probably shouldn't. You know, they're relocating to Kansas City, and yeah, they need to be there by the end of June. And, you know, oh, this divorce is a nasty one. You know, just things like that, they could really give somebody an advantage. Got to be careful. So I love the fact that you brought that up, because realtors do like to talk. I mean, we're all, you know, kind of social beings, and we do at the same time have to be careful, because as my OP always says, loose lips sink ships. So we have to be careful. Anybody else? Why do you think open-ended questions over closed-ended might work to your advantage in negotiating?
I would say, just going off of what Nicole said, is they may start talking about something that you didn't even consider as being a question, and all of a sudden you have additional knowledge that maybe changes something on your end.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. So another part of preparation is that anticipation part that we talked about. Thinking about, you know, what the response might be to the offer that's being made. Simple script would be right what it says on the slide there. You know, what would happen if? So an example of this might be, let's say, all right, Mary, let me pick on you for a second. If you can unmute yourself just for a moment, thank you. Let's say that, you know, you're my client and we've seen a property that you're interested in, and the list price of the property is $300,000, okay? And there's been activity there. It's a busy market, you know, you kind of know that, and you want to offer 280. Okay, this is just a simple conversation about price. So I say, all right, Mary, I appreciate the fact that you want to offer 280. There is a lot of activity on the property and you really seem to be interested in it. If we make the offer of 280, a number of things could happen. What would happen if the seller agreed to everything that you were asking for, but they really were firm on their price? Maybe they're willing to move a little bit and they come back at 295. What's going to happen then?
I would need to come up with a bigger down payment.
Okay, it sounds like you might be willing to consider paying 295 if they make that counter offer. Is that correct?
I would consider it, yes.
Yeah, okay. So I know what the next step might be. Now, a lot of things could happen. I mean, Mary could make that offer and there could be another offer that comes in at the same time for 300, and, you know, we're dead in the water unless there's something about Mary's offer that they really like, and they want to counter her offer, or accept it. But it just helps you anticipate, you know, what the next step might be. It could be over any of the negotiating points that we talked about. And another part of that conversation could be, why is that important to you? So you're understanding and asking another open-ended question to get more information and more insight on how big of an issue this might be, whether it's price, personal property, closing date, anything else that could be part of the offer. Any thoughts on this? Just kind of looking ahead.
No, just recognizing those were two closed-ended questions. But then the why is this important to you is an open-ended question.
Yeah.
You know, and I would, you know, as a client, a possible outcome would be, I don't think the house is worth it, but I do need to move. You know, so you learn more information about them and their time frame and maybe their budget.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. On page 9 in your guide, there's a scenario that you can read, or maybe I'll read it for you just so we're all on the same page. So what we want to do is review the scenario, circle or underline or make a note of the key areas in which you need more information or certainty before you could confidently negotiate on your client's behalf. And let's brainstorm some questions that you would ask your client, and you can write them down if you want to in the space that's provided below. And if there's anything that was kind of an aha for you in this process, obviously make a note of that also. So we're not going to go into breakout rooms for this. We're going to do this together. So here's the scenario. You are representing a single buyer. Oops, somebody's coming in. I just had to let them in from the waiting room. So this is on page 9 once again in your guide. You are representing a single buyer. Your client is renting her present property. Like any first-time buyer, she's looking to you to guide her through the process. The asking price for the home she really loves is $175,000. The house appears to have evidence of a roof leak. It's listed as is and is correctly priced. Your client would like to keep her payments as low as possible since she still has a number of student loans to pay off. She wants to write an offer for $155,000. There's been quite a bit of activity on the listing. So let's together see if we can, well, each of you can identify areas where you think you might need more information about this scenario. And then let's see if we can come up with 3 questions that would help us by asking the client so that we can gain more information. So we're looking for clarifying questions.
Jeff,
Yep.
I would kind of just rephrase that. She wants to write an offer for 155,000.
Right.
She doesn't want to go over 175, and to fix the roof, it's a pretty expensive fix. So would she still feel comfortable putting money into fixing the roof at 155? Or would she, what happens if there's another bid that is higher, say 170? Would she still be okay with that price and still knowing that she has money to put into the roof? Or you could also have the conversation of maybe, it's being sold as is, so you're not going to get the seller to kind of help with that, it's sounding like, but I don't know, I would kind of just clarify like the price that she wants, the money that maybe still has to go into the house, and what she's comfortable not going over.
Okay, so if we could boil that down to maybe one sentence or one question rather, what is the possibility of you paying for the repair and we stay at your 155 price? That could be part of the conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody have a second question that we could put on our list?
Oh, go ahead.
I would ask about her current lease or rent that she has now for time.
Okay.
Because if some people may be jumping the gun on this, but I would, if her lease isn't going to run out for 6 months, then it would give her time, money wise, whether she'd save more money or so on and so forth, but put an offer in on a house that she can't break a lease for. If she's going to break the lease, she's going to have to pay off that money to get out of the lease on top of whatever offer she's going to be putting in on the house that she's interested in. So I'd ask for
Okay.
time frame. I'd want to know a time frame exactly if we're jumping the gun here, or if it's she's going to be comfortable. She's going to have a lot of expense to into this. If her lease is 6 months or better, still that she has to pay.
Okay, so when is your lease expiring? You know, do you have to move by a certain date? That's going to open up this conversation that you just described.
Right.
I think that's great.
Mhm.
How about, I would ask the client, how would you respond if they come back with a 165 counteroffer?
Or something like, you know, what if the seller counters at full price and says that they will fix the roof? Or what if they counter at full price with no repairs at all? You know, how do you think you might respond to that? So yeah, that's great. I think that's right on the right track. One that I wrote down was, how did you arrive at the price that you'd like to offer? Now, it's like they told us that 175 is correctly priced, right? In this example, in the narrative. So I don't know why she wants to write an offer for 155. So I would just try to find out what her thought process was about that. She might be just thinking, well, I got to put a roof on, that's 20,000. I don't know. So I'd like to know, because they're telling us it's priced correctly, even though the roof has evidence of a leak. It sounds like maybe if this house had a new roof, maybe it should be 190. I don't know. But it sounds like it might be priced right in its present condition. So I would just like to find out what's in her mind as far as the offer that she's making.
Or is she pre-qualified or pre-approved for a certain amount?
Yeah, that could be. Also, it says that she has student loans to pay off, and I'm sure that she's thinking about those payments and really wants to pay the least that she possibly can. So there could be a conversation at one stage or another in here about, you know, the cost of money and what it's going to look like in terms of a payment at the offer that she'd like to make at 155, if on the off chance it gets accepted, versus 175. And, you know, if it's monthly payment, that's really what's got her concerned. She may find that 10 or 20,000 really doesn't matter that much in the payment because the interest rates are so low. So it could go in a lot of different directions.
You could ask her, how would you feel if you lost this house to another bidder?
Okay.
Like, would you be devastated, or if it doesn't matter, then don't put in a high offer if it doesn't matter?
Yeah, and you could also find out, you know, what is it about this house that makes it your favorite, right? Why do you like this house so much? Or what do you love about the house? What are the pluses? There might be a lot more pluses than there are minuses. And a lot of people tend to dwell on the negative, but when you actually start discussing with them that there's 10 positives here and 1 or 2 negatives, you know, nothing is perfect. Maybe we should be making a stronger move on this house because it really checks most of the boxes that you have as a buyer in your goals and your objectives. So yeah, great job coming up with questions here. I think they're really good. Okay, we're finally on to the second P, which is present. Present and learn. Page 10 in your participant guide goes through some detail about moving into the negotiating process by presenting your current offer to the cooperating agent and listening to the response. There are some tips in here for presenting offers. Back in the old days, we used to present offers in person. You know, that hardly ever happens anymore. If you had a buyer client or a buyer that you were working with, you would write the offer, you would call the listing agent and make an appointment. And a lot of times you'd go to the seller's house or go to the listing company's office and present it in person to the seller and to the listing agent. And with technology, obviously that's changed over the years. You know, now it's more commonly done by email or by telephone, sometimes even by text message. Once in a while, you've got a situation where you're still meeting in person. And the reason I'm bringing it up is just because some of the tips here are harder to get any information on, or it's hard to get nonverbal cues sometimes when you're not in front of somebody. You might be presenting an offer by Zoom, just like we are. So you can sometimes read a little body language into that, but it's more difficult than in person. But the tips here are to pay attention to any verbal or nonverbal cues. Keep quiet once you present an offer. Let them respond. Sometimes when we get excited, we just start talking too much and overselling. And we might have a thought in our mind that, oh, they're never going to accept this offer. And, that could actually take over our behavioral pattern and the amount that we talk, because we've already got something in our mind as far as an outcome goes, and we really don't know. So it's a good idea to keep quiet once we've touched on the high points and presented the offer. Listen carefully to what's important to the other party. Stay calm, stay professional, stay relaxed. Focus on your customer's needs and give your offer the best chance that it can possibly get, okay? And all these things are detailed on your page 10. On your page 11, it details some positioning and some high points in terms of positioning that you can take a look at and that we'll discuss briefly. Asking what and how questions, okay? An example of that is, Mr. Seller, you're requesting a 30-day closing. What's important to you about closing in 30 days? My goal is to let the buyer know why this point is important to you. So how you position your negotiations and provide insight, how you position your negotiations is important. And sometimes there's situations where you've got to walk away from the table and, the outcome might be a good one and it might not. I'll give you an example from something that happened to me several years ago. I had some buyers that were relocating. The woman was an executive with Nationwide Insurance in Liverpool, which is a northern suburb of Syracuse. And she and her husband had moved around a little bit and bought and sold a few houses, so they were pretty experienced buyers. They wanted to be in not kind of a rural location. So they picked out this house that was a custom built home with some acreage. It wasn't brand new, it was a resale. And they saw the house, they liked it. We made an offer. Offer was accepted. They did have a home inspection and they did like the normal things. The house was on a well and it was on septic. Okay, there were no public utilities there. And when we went back to do the final walkthrough, right before the closing, something had changed with the water and it had a very strong sulfur smell. And I pulled the back off of a couple of the toilets and it was like black inside. So I don't know if it was filtration equipment that stopped working or it was something that nobody noticed the first time around. This was 45 or 60 days, after we looked at the house, but this was a serious water problem. It was going to take remediation. It was going to take repair from a water treatment company. So we saw this and I called the listing agent, right away after discussing it with my client and said, listen, we have a situation here. We're going to have to delay the closing. The closing was supposed to be like the next day. So they got in touch with their client. They got in touch with their attorney. We negotiated to have a water treatment company come out and evaluate it and give an estimate and explain what the process would be for what would have to be done to clean up the water. So that took a couple of days and to get that appointment set up. And we ended up having a meeting with the buyer, myself, Cassane Water Conditioning Company, the seller, and their agent. And Cassane looked over the situation. They explained what had to be done with the filtration system and the fact that whatever was there now wasn't working properly. And this is how much it was going to cost. And of course, we asked the seller to pay for it and take care of it. And they took a position at that moment standing in their garage that day with the buyer and everybody else there, that they weren't going to do anything. And, you know, take it or leave it was basically the situation. And so my client and I just turned around and started walking down the driveway. And the driveway was like 200 feet long. So it was a slow walk. And we're just walking away down the driveway. We were parked on the street. And right when we got to the street, hey, wait a minute. And we turned around and they said, we'll take care of the problem. So that was, you know, something that happened in real life. It was just kind of interesting. And my buyer was going to walk. They were not going to pay for that. You know, they were living in a hotel and they could stay there as long as they wanted. And they were still on the company dime. And they literally would have called their attorney and said, look, this deal's off. You know, we want our deposit back, whatever it is. But the seller realized that they were going to have to take care of it for this buyer who was going to close in 48 hours, or they were going to have to take care of it for another buyer who hadn't even shown up yet. So they were going to be going back to the drawing board and probably incurring the same expense. So sometimes you have to be ready to walk away. And my client was ready to walk away. And, you know, that hardline approach in that situation paid off.
Jeff, who paid for Cassell to come in and evaluate the problem? Just curious.
There was no charge for that. They just gave a free estimate. You know, they could tell what the situation was, and these water conditioning companies seem to know all the geographic areas around and what their problems are with their water. So they can almost tell you, you know, before they even go out there. But then they have to look at the equipment, of course, and see, you know, what's involved in what equipment needs to be installed, how difficult or easy it's going to be to put it in, and how long it's going to take, and all of that. But they kind of know what the water problems are in certain areas, and they're usually more than willing to come out and give an estimate.
Yeah. If there was a cost, would it be the buyer or the seller that would cover it in that situation?
Well, we asked the seller to pay for it, and they said no. And then when we were ready to walk away, they finally agreed to do it. So I think in most cases it's going to be the seller, but it could be the buyer. I mean, the seller, you know, earlier on could have said, listen, we have a water situation here that needs to be taken care of, and we're pricing it, you know, accordingly, and we expect that the buyer will take care of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's provided you can even get it through the bank. I mean, if it fails a water quality test, you might not even be able to get the mortgage depending on the lender. So it just depends. Every situation is a little bit different.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, page 12. We're going to have an activity here, and we're once again going to do this one together. And it'll be fun, I think. I think we'll all learn something. So the following instructions are on the top of the page. If you can see your page 12, they're asking you to pick partners. I think that we can just do this by having a couple of volunteers and doing it together rather than going back into the breakout rooms. But we'll have to think on our feet a little bit. So if you guys are okay with that, I'll be looking for a volunteer or two, someone to be the buyer's agent and someone to be the listing agent. So think about what we've been learning so far in this course and using the supporting materials. Take a couple of minutes to prepare for a negotiation. Present your case to your partner and practice positioning. Go back and forth 2 times. Actually, I think we should go to breakout rooms for this. This is going to be too tough to do with everybody in the room. And if we go into breakout rooms, then everybody can get a chance to participate. And I think it'll be better for learning. So I'm going to break you up into small groups. And if you could take turns switching roles, we'll take about 10 minutes to do this. It's 10:29 right now. And we'll come back at approximately 10:40, okay? And what I really want to hear when you come back is some of the strategies that you might have used, anything that you might have learned, And if there's any solutions that anybody thinks of that don't get discussed, when we come back, don't be afraid to chime in because we can all learn from a different perspective, okay? So here we go. I'm going to stop the share and then we'll go into the breakout rooms.
And we're back.
Welcome back, everyone. So was that fun or what?
That's a disaster, Jeff. That's a disaster. You got a divorced daughter who's gonna take appliances. You know she's not gonna be able to move the shit on time. You know,
Right? So the property has 4 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, and it's listed at 350,000 in a well-established neighborhood. The house requires new carpeting throughout the first floor and a new garage door opener. 3 offers have been made, but all were below the asking price. All right, I'm excited to hear some feedback from some of the groups, or all of the groups. There was only 3 groups. Who wants to go first?
Well, me and Mary can go first.
Okay, great.
You know, so I'm the seller's agent and she's a buyer's agent.
Okay.
So, Mary, you can go first.
Hey, Nicole, I have a client that's interested in the property. They're still, is this is under contract already or not, Jeff?
No.
No contract yet. Okay.
But they put the purchase offer in, right?
Yeah, you're as the buyer agent's client's making an offer for 340. And, you know, it's really, how do we get to the finish line with these 2 positions? And, you know, whatever your conversation was around that, you could talk about that. You don't have to necessarily role play it, but you could if you want.
Oh, okay.
We role played it.
Okay.
I was thinking maybe call the seller agent and ask them if they're willing to leave any and all of the appliances. Is there any wiggle room there? Just as an open-ended question without, you know, saying they're thinking of making the offer for 340, and just sort of try to get more information about that.
Okay. So you're trying to find out if it's a deal breaker, right? Basically.
Mhm.
For
Right,
them.
right.
Okay.
Or if I can bring anything back to my client. You know.
Okay, so that would be part of, you know, preparing your offer. What, if anything, do you or anybody else think might be a solution on the appliance thing? If it's really going to be an obstacle, you know, how can we get through it? You know that they want to help their dog.
That's what we were thinking, like maybe not all the appliances would go, maybe just like the washer and dryer would go. We could
Okay.
present that to the sellers. I could present that to the sellers and be like, do you really want to move all the kitchen appliances out? It's easier to us to take the washer dryer.
Okay,
Most
So
houses
some-
have kitchen appliances.
so some could stay, some could go.
Mhm.
we discussed that the carpet and the garage door opener are not really, I mean, those aren't fact based on appliances.
Yeah,
To
appliances are
replace
more
a carpet and the
expensive.
garage door opener. You're right, compared to replacing a carpet and a garage door opener versus buying a fridge, a stove, a microwave, a washer, dryer, the dollar amounts that come into play there are night and day difference.
Mhm.
So not so much to focus on the hold the carpet, the garage door opener, who cares? Let's focus on just the appliance part of it, being based on the fact that if we're offering 340, you're fixed on 350, so be it. Appliances are 10 grand. We're staying at 340 if you want all the appliances. The other 2 things we were gonna leave out of it.
Okay. You know, the other thing is, just a comment that appliances could be expensive to move. And it might be a better solution for them to just buy new appliances for their daughter. Appliances are not going to be cheap to move, you know, especially.
Well, she's
if you're
going through a
talking-
divorce. Just give her the 10 grand. She'll need it.
Let her shop for her own appliances, right?
Yes.
Well, shop for a lawyer with 10 grand. The hell with the appliances. You gotta have a place to put them.
One of our strategies was to actually try to put the husband and the daughter back together again, because that might let the deal go.
Pay the 10, all right, a bounty. Here's 10 grand. You keep her.
Nibbling.
Yeah, I mean,
Like-
sometimes I guess we have to take on the role of psychiatrist as well, right? Marriage counselor, as well as other things.
Like how far is she into the divorce? Like,
Right, right.
Let me reverse this.
You know, the other thing here is that 3 offers have been made, right, that weren't accepted. So what does that tell you about their asking price?
Too high.
Right. It's got to be a little high, I would think, if people are all coming in low and they're not beating the doors down to buy it for full price or higher.
Especially with the contract demands of the appliances are leaving and the house also needs this and this.
Yep. So the sellers, they want to move to Florida, right? But they don't want to do it until their house is sold, although they'd like to get to Florida as soon as possible, and they're ready to stand their ground regarding the price. Well, they have been standing their ground, and they haven't been successful so far. So the other part of it is, you know, the longer it takes them to sell, the more it actually probably costs them
Mhm.
in taxes, utilities, maintenance, you know, and a shorter closing and taking this deal or getting this deal together is going to probably stop a little bit of bleeding on the seller's part, and they're going to have a better bottom line, I think, by selling sooner rather than later. I mean, the longer a listing sits on the market, typically the less the seller is going to net at the end of the day. You know, we've seen it time and time again when sellers do not accept the first offer that comes in, and sometimes that first offer is their best offer. And then 2 or 3 months later, not necessarily in this market so much, but in a typical market, 2 or 3 months later, they're ready to stop the bleeding and they sell it and they net less than they would have if they would have taken that first deal. So that does happen, and it could easily happen to these people in this scenario because they're really dragging it out and refusing offers that come in. So what else? What other solutions that we haven't talked about that you think should be mentioned? Anything? Okay.
Maybe as the seller agent, you could motivate the seller by saying, you know, these people need to move, they're from out of state, create a sense of urgency. You're going to lose this buyer if you don't, you know, seriously consider this offer.
Remember last week when we talked about an A buyer,
Mhm.
ready, willing, and able?
Mhm.
Great point. This is an A buyer. They're ready, willing, and able. They're ready to purchase now. They want to be in a place as soon as possible. So you're absolutely right. I agree with you 100%. So the time right now is 10:49. In the beginning, I talked about a break. Do you guys want to take a break or do you want to keep going? If you need a break?
Let's
We'll
finish.
take-
Short
Pardon?
break.
Short break. Yeah.
Okay, great. Is a 10-minute break long enough?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take 10 and we will come back at 11 and we're headed down the home stretch, okay? See you shortly.
I'm not gonna be able to. Oh, okay. Is it a mandatory thing? Okay, because I got a doctor's appointment. I can always reschedule it. Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, yes.
I'll just give it another minute. Still a few people that need to return. Today is our virtual sales team meeting day in Syracuse at 12 o'clock. We do one sales team meeting per month. And today is the day. Okay, welcome back, everyone. We're going to keep rolling this train down the tracks here. We really are in the home stretch of negotiate the deal. And we should have a little bit of time at the end if anyone wants to discuss anything, kick some ideas around, ask some questions, whatever it might be. I can stick around for a few minutes after we finish up. But first we need to actually do that and finish up. So we're moving on now to analyzing counter tactics. The next topic on the agenda, and what we're going to do is analyze and recall counter tactics to make the negotiation a win-win. And of course, I can't advance my slide again. I don't know what this is, but I apologize. There's not much I can do about it. See if we can get it back. Yay. All right. I think maybe it just freezes if it's inactive for a certain amount of time. I can't really tell. But anyway, analyzing counter tactics. Your page 13 in your participant guide is what you should look at. And we're going to do this together. I think as a group activity, it'll be fun. We're going to have one more breakout after this, and that will be the last one. But this one talks about certain tactics that clients or agents might use to kind of manipulate the negotiation. These tactics are generally predictable, as it explains on page 13 in the guide. So you can learn quickly how to identify them accurately and in a hurry when they're being used on you. And additionally, you can respond with the appropriate counter tactic with a high probability of accurately predicting how your response will be taken. So there's 3 areas that they outline here as far as these counter tactics go. And one is called hot potato, and the other one is called good guy, bad guy. And then there's one that's called nibbling, okay? Hot potato is asking for a concession in return before agreeing to any further concessions. So think about an example of what a hot potato scenario might be. Good guy, bad guy. Test the validity, also known as good cop, bad cop. Test the validity, find out if the problem is real. Has the party with the problem exhausted every possible solution? And then nibbling, call them on their game. If it continues, then attribute what the bad guy says to the good guy, since they're a tag team anyway. This will likely diffuse the tactic because now you have 2 bad guys. So we're going to be asked to match these up, okay, A, B, and C with hot potato, good guy, bad guy, and nibbling. I did not give them to you in order respectively. So we're going to talk about this together. Who thinks they know which one hot potato is? Anybody want to take a stab at hot potato?
C.
Anybody
It's
think it's
A.
something else?
I think it's A.
Hot potato.
I would say
Test the
A.
hot potato. Sorry, what's that?
I'm sorry, I was just saying, I thought it was A.
Okay. Here's what.
Is it B?
Hot potato, test the validity, find out if the problem is real. Has the party with the problem exhausted every possible solution? B. What about good guy, bad guy?
C?
Yeah, it's C. It's definitely C. When do you think you might see a scenario of good guy, bad guy? Anybody have any thoughts on that? And how you might diffuse it or get to a win-win? It happens a lot, like it mentions in your guide, with 2 people that are selling or buying a property together. You know, it might be a husband and a wife. It could be a husband and a husband. It could be 2 people that just want to live together. But it comes up a lot. You know, you've got one that you might feel like that person really takes the lead on everything. The other person could actually be the decision maker, you know, and they're the quiet one. And when it comes down to brass tacks, you might have one of them that's aggressive, you know, and the other one might be really friendly and considerate. And it seems like one of them wants to move forward and, you know, the other one has got the brakes on. It's important to have an idea of how to approach that kind of situation and find out how serious, you know, the objection really is. Any thoughts on how you might do that? But like it says here, you know, we know that they're a tag team anyway. And I think sometimes you just have to confront what's going on and be straight up about it and say, listen, let's say they're buyers, okay? You're both interested in this house. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having a conversation about making an offer. Joe, you seem like you really want to move forward. And Jane, it just seems like you keep putting the brakes on, especially in this situation. What would have to happen for you to agree with Joe and move forward together as a team? Because you are a team, right? I would call her on it and I would see what she says, because it might uncover something that's going on, you know, between the two of them and how they make decisions. You're not going to get anywhere until that problem gets solved, right? It could also be that she's just scared. You know, maybe Jane is nervous and she's got one of these minor objections that you can easily overcome, but until you can get out of her why she's exhibiting this type of behavior, it's going to be hard to move forward. And people will play this game, you know, with you sometimes, and you'll recognize it right away. And my advice is to confront it professionally and really try to bring out into the open why one seems to be a good and one seems to be a bad, and try to get them together so they're both good and not both bad. What about nibbling? We know which one that is now, right?
Jeff, I think this is in that one.
Pardon me?
Jane's gonna need the appliances in that situation.
Let's hope we can keep them together and keep them moving forward buying a house. But sometimes it doesn't work out. That's the reality of it too. The one on nibbling is asking for a concession in return before agreeing to any further concessions. I've seen this happen a bunch of times. You'll have, you know, what you know is like a pretty good offer that checks most of the boxes for the other party, and they won't give you an answer on it. They'll come back and they'll ask for something that is really like a non-issue when you really boil it down, and it's just a stall tactic. And that's what we call nibbling, no matter what side that it's coming from. And people will sometimes do that. Most of the time, it's because they think they need to say something, or they think they need to negotiate over something just for the sake of doing it, or they could be nervous. A lot of times people are nervous and they'll use little things as excuses to keep them from moving forward. And sometimes they show up in the form of in the negotiations through this process that we call nibbling. So if you learn how to recognize them and think about some counter tactics as how to break through that, it's going to be helpful. If anybody has any further thoughts on it, fire away. I'd love to hear. So now we're going to do another, what we call real play, and we're going to need to break out for this one. On page 14, we've got another buyer agent role and listing agent role. I realize that because we've got an odd number of people in the group, it's going to be harder to break into smaller groups. So you'll go into groups of 3 again, and if you can take turns in each role amongst the 3 of you, during the time allowed, that'll be helpful for everybody. This activity is about employing the 3 Ps that we've been learning about, and it's about using some of the negotiation skills and tactics that we've talked about in this session. The goal in the role play is to reach a win-win. It's obviously easy to just dig your heels in and not agree to anything. Don't do that to the other person. I'm sure you wouldn't anyway. But work together towards a win-win. You don't have to make it simple and easy to get to the yes. However, it should be definitely achievable. So our common points of negotiation: price and terms, okay? Prepare, present, and position. And we've also learned about counter tactics. So just decide who's going to play either role once you're in your groups, and each person should review their role and prepare to negotiate a counteroffer on their own, and then present the case to their partner. Try to go back and forth a couple of times. You may only be able to do it once because you're in groups of 3, but strive for that win-win agreement, okay? And we're going to give at least 10 minutes for this so that you're not rushed. And then when you come back, I'd love to hear about how things went, what your ahas were. Does anybody have any questions? All right. I'll give you a heads up when you're going to be returning. Okay, welcome back, everybody. The 3 Ps, the beautiful 3 Ps. How did you guys do?
It was very vague, so it was kind of to work off of.
You mean the description of the roles?
Yeah, and like we don't know the price, we don't know what the buyer's financing is or anything, so that was kind of a tough one to do.
Yeah, I think when they designed this activity that they were looking for a lot of questions to be asked, you know, to gather more information as part of the role play. So what did you guys come up with on preparing a counteroffer? We know that an offer's been made, right? And you as a buyer's agent are being told, or you as a listing agent are telling the buyer's agent, okay, we've gotten several offers, but the offer is pretty low. And we also have a little bit more information in there that, you know, the timing on those other offers may not have worked, right? So let's say you're in a buyer agent role. What did somebody in that role come up with as far as their approach, you know, their thought process, any questions they might have asked to see if they could get this to the next step?
Perhaps feel out if the seller could give seller concessions, since the buyers are at the top of their price range, to try to bring it together.
Okay, so you'd be looking to lower the buyer's acquisition costs or cash to close through a seller concession.
Mhm.
Okay,
Based on the seller's time constraint. Time is money. So we discussed seller concessions because 45 days, if it's an all cash deal, that's probably fine. But for conventional financing, that's pretty tight.
yeah, it's probably about the minimum amount of time, you know, that would be needed to get a deal with financing closed. I agree with that. If I was in the buyer's agent's role, I would probably try to isolate some of the terms, you know, from the price. And I would say, okay, so you're telling me that the offer my buyer is making is pretty low. What's important to the sellers besides the price? Or except for the price, how do the sellers feel about the terms of the offer? You know, if the price was acceptable, would they sign it today? Try to find out if there's anything else there that's in the way besides the price, and see what the listing agent says. Or even you throw the ball back in their court and say, okay, you know, thanks for the response and thanks for considering the offer. What do you think it would take to make this a win-win and have my client's offer accepted? Now, what do we need to do to put this together? And see what they say. You know, they may say, have your buyer pay the full price or the listing price. You know, they may say something else. I don't know what they're going to say. But just getting a response, your offer is pretty low, that doesn't really tell me a lot. I mean, they still haven't accepted another offer and they're saying our offer is pretty low. Okay, what else is there here that I can find out about, that I can sink my teeth into and, you know, go back to my client with? Maybe the listing agent will share, you know what, Jeff, if you came back with something like this, I think the sellers might accept it. Sometimes you'll get that kind of a response because they want to work together, you know, for a win-win. And they might not tell you exactly, but they might hint a little bit at a scenario that they think might fly. And if they can do that without violating any confidentiality with their client, then that's fine. No problem. How about as a listing agent? Did anybody have any thoughts about how they might respond to this offer differently than this listing agent did? Or any way that they might be able to coax this buyer's agent into getting a more attractive offer for their client? it looks like we definitely have a motivated seller, right? They've got to move within 45 days. They might not close within 45 days, but they need to move, right? So they're definitely motivated.
So I'd see why they're fixed on a certain price, for what reason that it has to be that they're not willing to negotiate the price down.
What happens a lot of times with sellers like this is, you know, they have to go through some pain before they're willing to go ahead and accept a lower price. And sometimes that pain comes in the form of 3 or 4 offers that they say no to, and they don't get another higher offer. And then they finally get another one and they realize, you know what, if we're going to sell this property, we need to bite the bullet a little bit here and be reasonable and sell it. Time can definitely affect the position that they're in. You know, they might be super confident and cocky the first few weeks, but after 2 months on the market and rejecting a few offers, they might not be as confident anymore. And then when they get an offer, they realize that they better grab it and move forward with it. But the agents here, in my opinion, the agents here need to be talking to each other and trying to find a road to success. And that's going to come through questioning and trying to get a feel for what it's going to take to put this together. So asking questions around that in order to prepare for another offer from the buyer, I think is the way to get the information that's going to be needed to structure something that's going to be attractive to both sides. They're going to have to move. And what I mean by move is there's going to have to be movement in their positions if it's going to come together. And if we don't know what it's really going to take, then it's going to be hard for us to keep it moving forward. So I think that asking questions and practicing that positioning is going to help as long as both parties in this conversation really want to get to that win-win. And if they do, you know, hopefully they can find a way and then go back and get it validated or authorized by their client. I mean, I realize that they don't tell us here, you know, what the list price is and how much was being offered, and there's definitely some ambiguous details. So I think the only way to get to it is by trying to ask some questions and kind of keep it moving. Anything else anybody wants to share on this?
Jeff, are you allowed to come out and just say, what was the highest? If the agent is telling you you're kind of on the low side, besides just asking for like, what number would it take for the offer to have in it? Something like that. Are you allowed to just come out and ask, well, what was the highest price offered?
You can ask, yeah. And they may or may not tell you.
Okay.
But you can ask. I mean, and another thing you can do is say, all right, you're telling me my offer is low. Okay, I appreciate that. Thanks for sharing that with me. Let me ask you a question. Do you think it's way off, or is it in the ballpark? You know,
Okay.
then you start to get a sense possibly of, you know, how far off the mark you are. But yeah, you can ask. There's not a problem with asking. And as far as disclosing, you know, what your buyer would be willing to pay, your buyer gives you permission, then you can disclose. It's just like as a listing agent, sometimes the seller will tell them something like, I want you to let any potential buyer knows that even though we're asking $430, we are not going to reject any reasonable offer and we're willing to negotiate. And you can put something like that out there. It's not committing them to a certain number, but it's letting any potential buyers know that, yeah, there's some wiggle room here. And sometimes that can help, you know, to make a deal. You're not seeing that very much in this market. But it's interesting. There was a listing that I went and took a look at yesterday because I wanted to see it in person. And it was on the market for 44 days at $439. It was in a really nice area, in great condition, only about a 10-year-old house. And they reduced it to $399. And I said, wow, this is a big move. You know, these people must be motivated. So I wanted to go look at it, and I went and I took a look and previewed the property, and I sent somebody a video, and sure enough, 2 offers came in on it yesterday. So that move that they made brought it into a whole new group of buyers that weren't willing to go over 400, and it sold like that. But they were playing the game, trying to maximize, what they could get out of this market, and I don't blame them. That's what they wanted to do. Now, if they would have listed it at $399 on day one, maybe it would have gotten bid up to $410. We don't really know, and maybe it's still going to get bid
Yeah,
up.
right.
We don't know. But they got 2 offers instantly by that reduction. So I thought it was kind of interesting.
Less is more sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's right.
So we're pretty much through the course material. It's 11:40 right now. If there's any questions that you have, or if you want to talk about other things, I can stick around and do that. So if you do, fire away. Otherwise, I hope that you're staying on track with the things that you're charged with doing during the course, and that you're getting some momentum, mainly with building your database, because that's really the very most important thing that you can be doing, is talking to people, getting them into command, getting them onto smart plans, sharing your app, just making contact with people, having conversations, letting them know what you do, sending those notes, thanking them for talking with you, and also getting to know your market and getting to know your inventory if you're new. It's really important to have feet on the ground and try to see some actual houses, even if you're just previewing. It's a little harder to do during COVID, just because people are trying to minimize, I think, the amount of foot traffic in their house, but things are getting better, and you can still preview properties online as well. And there's vacant houses out there you can probably get into pretty easy. Knowing that inventory is key, though. It's going to really let your buyers know that you're knowledgeable, that you're a local expert, that you know what you're doing. So I would urge you to follow that daily 10-4 and really stick with it and give it your all and build that database. At the same time, continue to get education, practice your scripts and dialogues, find somebody to script practice with. Keep in mind, of course, that the state of emergency is still in effect unless I missed something in the last day or two. So you can't cold call people. It's not allowed during a state of emergency. And always make sure that you pay attention to the do not call list so that you're not getting yourself in trouble. We had an agent that got fined $2,000 for a do not call violation on an expired listing. And they really innocently did it. I mean, they were just trying to do what real estate agents do, but they got called out on it and they ended up having a problem and they had to pay money, which is awful. And the other thing is to get familiar with those forms like we talked about before. If you're not already, practice with someone in your office, whether it's your team leader, productivity coach, agent services coordinator, if you have one, or another agent. Be able to sit down with somebody and say, listen, I just want to run through this buyer agency agreement with you and make sure that you can paraphrase what's in the agreement in a way that you're going to be able to deliver it when you have your appointments and your consults in a comfortable, relaxed, conversational way. It just comes with practice. It's, as they say, time on the task over time. And you get more comfortable, and before you know it, it's in your DNA, so to speak, and it's like second nature when you're talking about these things. So does anybody have anything that they want to share, or any questions, or you want to chit chat about anything, or are we good? Well, I thank you all for spending the time today, and I hope that you got something out of it. Congratulations on the next, what is it, 2 more classes that you have? Just a couple more, right, of elementals?
We're on the countdown.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're almost to the finish line. I mean, Jennifer, you took this before, right? So
Me?
second time through, Jennifer Saltzman?
Oh,
I did this last week. So, no. I took a few, like whatever the last 10 days was, yeah.
Yeah, I think you were in this session last time around. That's why I asked.
There you go.
Well, anyway, great. Congratulations. And I hope that you're doing well. And if I can be helpful in any way, don't hesitate to contact me, jeffroney@kw.com, or my cell phone number is 315-254-6973. And I hope we can all get together at a training event soon, in person, live, maybe at the Strath Allen Hotel in Rochester, and do a little networking in person. It's always great. So have a good day.
Thanks.
You too.
Thanks,
Hey.
Jeff.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye now.
Thanks, Jeff.